There is a giant heist happening right under your nose. And just like any good heist, the heisters have a complex plan, where the heisters, some of the richest people in America, are tricking the heistees, you and your family, at multiple points, culminating in billions of dollars stolen from all of us.
But unlike a heist, it's entirely legal, thanks to one little loophole designed to help the heisters, who aren't a band of cool guys like Ocean's 11, but rather,
oh, come on, build with me a strong portfolio with private equity. Oh, come on and build with Blackstone.
That's last year's Christmas video by Blackstone, the world's largest alternative asset manager. They do hedge funds, private equity, and other investing that are headquartered right here in New York City. And they've been one of the masterminds of the heist. They make money off of your labor. And if you're making anywhere over $47,000-ish a year, you're likely taxed more for every dollar you earn than they are on a large part of their income. Luckily, the president seems to want to stop it.
The hedge fund guys didn't build this country. These are guys that shift paper around and they get lucky. The hedge fund guys are getting away with murder. They're making a tremendous amount of money. They have to pay taxes.
Yeah, President Trump is right here. Will he be the president who finally takes on these guys and stops this heist on America? Well, first let's look at how we got here. To really understand this 2025 tax code, like any classroom video, we need to roll back the clock a little bit to a certain part of history. No, further back, to the 16th century seafaring industry. In the 1500s, merchants would ship some goods and materials by sea to and from faraway places. For the ship captains, this was dangerous work. I think they still had sea monsters back then, if these maps are accurate. And they wanted to get paid well for the risk they were taking with their ships, their sailors, and their own lives. A regular paycheck wouldn't do. So they started a tradition of taking 20% of the value of whatever was on the ship. It was called carried interest. Literally the captain's interest in what they were carrying. Okay, now jump forward again.
We call it America's tax plan.
No, like to There Will Be Blood times. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, prospectors were trolling the American West for places to drill oil. Drilling oil requires a lot of things: money, management, time, and actual labor. So an oil venture would require multiple investors. But then also the people who do the actual work. Well, not the actual work, these guys weren't well workers, but the management and planning of the sites. So often several investors would invest cash while one would invest sweat equity, or their management labor, and get paid for it out of the investment's returns. They weren't an employee, they were still a partner in the firm, but they were doing work and then receiving a payout for their work. These guys weren't like fighting the harsh realities of the uncharted seas or anything, but they were still taking a risk. So they used that same logic and took 20% for their risk. Then, in the late 1940s, two things happened. In 1947, a couple named Arlene and Joseph, owners of a Pennsylvania seed store, have a baby. Trust me, that's important. And in 1949, Alfred Winslow Jones, a Marxist-Leninist journalist who'd done war reporting in Spain, hung out with Dorothy Parker, and was described as a dandy, scraped together $100,000 for a career very different than Marxist journalism: an investment firm. Jones's firm did a few new things. One was short selling. Generally, investment firms invested in businesses' successes, but short selling, a somewhat new mechanism, allowed investors to invest in the failure of businesses. It was generally frowned upon and considered anti-American at the time. Now it's a major part of our financial systems. It's all based on leverage. They'll use their wealth and connections to borrow assets, sell them, then hope the price goes down so they can buy them back before they have to return them. It's all part of the game that they're allowed to play and you aren't, because you aren't allowed in. Investing in failures allowed him to take more risky investments on successes, because all his risks were hedged. The fund was hedged. Jones invented the hedge fund. Yeah, the hedge fund was invented by a dandy Marxist. But beyond investing his own money, Jones's firm took in investors, and he took an idea from another industry that carried interest. Jones's firm had investors, but he was doing all the actual work of finding good investments. So he charged the investors the 20% fee of all the investment returns he made, inspired by those old oil barons and ship captains. Over the following decades, the hedge fund model grew and became more popular, as did the payment model. The partners and high-ranking executives in the firm all went for this same 20% angle. The payment model spread with the emergence of the private equity industry, which we've told you about before, like a lot, that pays out their leaders in the same way. As the model grew, the influence on the economy became more clear. Hedge funds were an extremely efficient way to transfer wealth from the working class to the ultra-wealthy. They're one of the main reasons our economy is so gamified, why housing has become an asset rather than a thing we can all share, and why you might feel excluded from the wealth train of the stock market. It's all set up so everything funnels to these guys. Then in the 1980s,
I'll ring the bell so trading can begin.
Nope, still no. In the 1980s, that baby from earlier came back. Stephen A. Schwarzman founded Blackstone in 1985 with his business partner Peter G. Peterson, originally as just a consulting firm that eventually began doing private equity, and in the 90s, hedge funds.
We at Blackstone got into the real estate business in 1992. I guess we bought our first piece of real estate. We bought garden apartments in Little Rock, Arkansas.
By combining private equity, real estate, hedge funds, and other alternative investments, that's when a fund invests in anything other than the normal stock market, Blackstone became one of the biggest funds in the world. They manage nearly $1 trillion in assets. $1 trillion. And guess how Schwarzman and his cohort get paid a large part of their income? With that same 20% carried interest that ship captains and oilmen got for the risk they were taking. But bankers don't have to worry about the very real risks of 16th century sea travel, or an oil rig exploding, or Cthulhu, or whatever. So does it really make sense that they get paid with the same logic as those older industries? All of it has made Schwarzman one of the richest people in America. But so what, right? People hire him to invest money and he gets paid for it. They agree to the fees when they sign up, right? That's where the tax law comes in. That 20% that Schwarzman pulls in is taxed at a rate of less per dollar than many Americans are taxed on their income.
Surprise!
And a big part of the reason that's true is because of...
In a moment, I'll be sitting at that desk and signing the most sweeping overhaul of tax code in our nation's history.
Yes, finally. In 1986, Ronald Reagan signed the Tax Reform Act of 1986. That bill made a massive change. For the first time, the top individual tax rate was lower than the top corporate tax rate. Both still went down, of course. Individual went from 50% to 28% and corporate dropped to 34%. That created desirability for something called a pass-through entity, a form of corporate structure where all profits and losses pass through the business entirely and are filed on the partner's personal tax forms. Now that Blackstone is publicly traded, it's a bit more complicated, but the most important thing is that Blackstone, one of the biggest, most profitable corporations in the world, didn't pay corporate tax at all until 2019 when they switched to a normal corporate structure, 2 years after President Trump slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. The partnership structure made it more difficult for people to buy stock in Blackstone, and they figured being a normal corporation would sell more stock. Blackstone makes its money by charging its customers, investors, a general fee and a performance fee that they call carried interest. That's where the loophole comes in. That 20% fee created by sailors for their risk is how Schwarzman is technically paid a large part of his income.
So that's what we're doing at Blackstone.
Fees and carried interest made up around $190 million of Schwarzman's total yearly compensation. The compensation that allows him to own 5 massive homes, one of which he built a full-scale replica of just blocks away from the real thing for his own birthday party, which was hosted by Martin Short. And here's why that's also important. Because of this taxation setup, it's taxed as capital gains, not income. That means it's often taxed as little as 20%, whereas someone making as much as Schwarzman should be being taxed at nearly 40% for income. So if you make more than $48,475 a year, you're being taxed more for every dollar you earn than Schwarzman is on that part of income. And it's not just Schwarzman, obviously. Many bankers take advantage of this massive loophole. Every private equity firm and hedge fund in America has a handful of already highly compensated partners and executives who are recipients of carried interest fees. All told, the American people are losing out on $18 billion in tax revenue being hoarded by the ultra-wealthy. And the thing is, that money comes from you and your work. The private equity industry owns companies employing nearly 12 million people. So there's a good chance these guys are your boss. They're playing with your life. They invest in the things you need to live, from food to pharmaceuticals, treating these necessities as gambling chips in their pursuit of ultimate wealth, like they're the owners, high rollers, and heisters of the financial casino. They also own millions of homes across America, so for many people, if your rent went up, it's because it went to their pockets.
We're the largest private owner of real estate in the world.
And the fees themselves come from you. Their major investors aren't always other rich people. They're pension funds, 401ks, IRAs, and other investments working class people rely on for retirement. And ironically, they make money off retirement too. Private equity firms are seizing control of nursing homes to make money off of the elderly and the taxpayer through Medicare and Medicaid. This whole concept of quarterly capitalism, or running companies based on trying to impress shareholders every quarter rather than building long-term success and respecting workers and consumers, was basically created by the hedge fund model. So if all they do is take, why aren't they being made to give back with taxes? The Chamber of Commerce, a pro-business lobbying group that gets funding from hedge funds and private equity firms, insists that taxing carried interest as income, as it should be, would kill jobs, harm innovation, and other bogus pro-business buzzword arguments. But in reality, the hedge funds and private equity firms have no interest in creating jobs or making better technology. They just want to siphon as much money as possible to themselves, to people like this.
Secondaries, infrastructure, real estate, we get it.
Can you believe people confuse us with them?
So if carried interest is so clearly income, and its tax structure currently only benefits a couple of thousand very wealthy people, how the hell is it still set up like this? Well, it's because of the incredible power of the industry and our government. Let's quickly look at a few attempts to change things, like one put forth by Chuck Schumer on the dawn of the financial crisis, 2007, which would have taxed carried interest like income. Sounds great, right? But according to some conservative outlets, Schumer sabotaged it on purpose. He made it so the bill would also change taxation on carry for the oil and gas industry. Remember them? So that their lobbying would destroy the bill, and it would look like Schumer at least tried. Schumer's excuse was that just going after bankers was unfair to his constituents. Wall Street is in New York, after all. In 2007, when banker Leo Henry Jr. was set to testify in Congress about why carried interest should be taxed as income, he got a call the night before. It was Stephen A. Schwartzman, who angrily called Henry a traitor and threatened to leave the business if his tax rate changed. President Obama tried to rein in carried interest, and Schwartzman compared him to Hitler invading Poland. Seriously, Schwartzman said that. Then in the 2012 election, carried interest became a point of contention between Obama and his hedge fund opponent, Mitt Romney. He brought it up one more time in 2015, and Congress shrugged. Then, of course, there's when Trump promised to take it on. He was joined by his opponent, Hillary Clinton, and Senator Bernie Sanders.
They want the carried interest provision, which is very important to Wall Street people.
I've been in favor of getting rid of carried interest for years.
It's an extremely popular policy idea. Tax bankers properly for the money they make moving other people's money around. In 2017, when the Trump tax bill was coming together, Maine Senator Susan Collins introduced an amendment for a child tax credit that would be paid for by taxing carried interest. She mysteriously pulled it the next day. Today, she's the #1 Senate recipient of private equity industry donations. Wonder how that happened. And yeah, Trump used to talk about carried interest all the time. But then Stephen A. Schwartzman became a supporter, and all of that talk mysteriously died down until things looked like this.
I want to thank Steve Schwarzman for putting together this very incredible group of world-class business leaders. That's what you are.
There's this website, FactBase, where you can search all of the times a specific politician mentioned something, and you can see up through the entire 2016 election, he was constantly talking about carried interest and hedge funds. He was always talking about how they're not taxed enough.
I would take carried interest out. Carried interest, carried interest, carried interest, carried interest, carried interest, the carried interest provision, carried interest provisions, carried interest. Carried interest, which is something that a lot of rich hedge fund guys love. but we're getting rid of, they don't love me so much anymore.
But then all of a sudden, after he takes office, the only time it comes up is in an interview when a reporter asks him why he used to talk about it all the time, and then doesn't do anything about it.
Is carried interest something you'd still like to do?
I would like to do it, I will do it, but every time I want to do it, they offer me things that are much more valuable than carried interest. It's not that much money.
Now Trump's new administration is rife with hedge fund and private equity beneficiaries and the lobbyists who work for them. Hedge fund and private equity billionaires are not taking the same risks as 16th century ship captains. They're putting the risks on us, making money off of us, and taking very little risk themselves. Stephen A. Schwartzman will always be fine.
Congratulations, Steve. You're a friend of mine, but on a great career. You have had an amazing career.
He will never suffer a financial loss that seriously, materially changes his life. So why should he continue to pay less per dollar on this income? Not capital gains, it's income, than you do. Hold these billionaires and the politicians that enable them accountable, and make them taxed as much as you are.
Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to support more journalism like this. And if there's anything similar that you want to see us cover, let us know in the comments and we'll take a look.